I work as a veterinary technician in Millbrook, a small town in upstate New York with a population of just under 3,000. Last October, we started getting an unusual number of missing dog reports at our clinic. What began as a concerning trend evolved into something far more sinister than any of us could have imagined. Our clinic serves not just Millbrook, but several surrounding communities, so we're usually the first to notice patterns involving pets in the area. It started with Mrs. Henderson's golden retriever, Max. She came into the clinic one morning nearly in tears, asking if anyone had brought him in. Max had somehow gotten out of their fenced backyard overnight. We took down the information and posted it on our social media, but something felt off about the situation. Max was 12 years old with hip dysplasia, not the type of dog to jump fences. 3 days later, the Patel's German Shepherd went missing. Then the Coopers lost both their labs. Within 2 weeks, 7 more dogs disappeared from their yards, all from the same general area of town. Our clinic manager asked me to start mapping out where each missing dog had lived. The pattern was clear. All the disappearances formed a rough circle around the old Matthews property at the end of Oak Street. The place had been abandoned for years after the previous owner died without any heirs. The town had been trying to seize it for back taxes, but something always seemed to hold up the process. I decided to drive by the property after work one evening. The house sat back from the road, partially hidden behind overgrown hedges and ancient oak trees. The yard was a jungle of waist-high grass and brambles. As I slowed my car to get a better look, I noticed something odd. There was a narrow path worn through the tall grass, leading around to the back of the house. Someone had been walking through there regularly. I parked my car a few houses down and walked back, telling myself I was just going to take a quick look. The November air was crisp, and dried leaves crunched under my feet as I approached the property. Standing at the edge of the yard, I could see that several windows were broken, their jagged edges like teeth in the growing darkness. The path through the grass was even more distinct up close, recently traveled with what looked like paw prints in the muddy sections. Following the trail led me to a basement entrance at the rear of the house. The door was secured with a new padlock, completely out of place on the decrepit building. I took out my phone and switched on the flashlight, scanning the ground around the entrance. That's when I saw them. Dozens of collar tags scattered in the grass, glinting in the beam of light. I recognized Max's tag immediately, the blue heart-shaped one Mrs. Henderson had shown us a picture of. My hands shaking, I called the police. They arrived within minutes. In a small town like ours, there's never much else going on. When they broke open the padlock and we descended the basement stairs, the smell hit us first. A putrid mixture of decay and chemicals that burned my nostrils. The beam of the officers' flashlights revealed a scene that still haunts my dreams. The basement had been converted into some kind of makeshift laboratory. Stainless steel tables lined the walls, their surfaces stained dark brown. Surgical instruments were arranged neatly on trays. Various chemicals in unmarked containers filled several shelves. But what made my blood run cold were the notebooks, dozens of them, filled with detailed anatomical drawings and surgical procedures, all focused on canine subjects. The handwriting became increasingly erratic as the pages progressed, devolving into barely legible ramblings about improving the design and correcting nature's mistakes. In the backyard, ground-penetrating radar revealed what we'd all been dreading: multiple sites where remains had been buried. The police investigation uncovered that someone had been living in a small room off the basement, accessing it through a concealed entrance in the neighboring woods. They found evidence of long-term occupation: a cot, non-perishable food, and disturbingly, a wall covered in photographs of local dogs, many with X's marked through them. The police never found who was responsible. They suspected it was someone with medical training, given the surgical precision evident in their notes. The investigation revealed that similar patterns of missing dogs had occurred in 3 other small towns across the state over the past decade, each time centered around an abandoned property. Each time, the perpetrator vanished before they could be caught. We installed security cameras at the clinic after that, and most people in town got them for their homes too. The missing dog cases stopped, but every now and then we get reports from nearby towns that sound eerily familiar. I've since moved to a different clinic in a bigger city, but I still check the news from Millbrook regularly. Last week, I read that someone broke into the evidence locker at the police station. The only things taken were the notebooks from the basement. Sometimes when I'm walking my own dog at night, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if somewhere in the darkness, someone is watching, making plans, waiting to continue their work. I've been the head librarian at Cedar Grove Public Library for the past 6 years. In a town of just 4,000 people, the library serves as more than just a place for books. It's our community's archive and unofficial historical society. Last March, while digitizing our newspaper collection, I stumbled upon something that made me question everything I thought I knew about our quiet town. It started when Mrs. Blackwood came in looking for information about her sister, who disappeared in 1985. She mentioned her sister had last been seen at a traveling carnival that used to visit Cedar Grove. As I helped her search through our microfiche archives, I noticed something odd. There were other disappearances reported during carnival visits, spaced out every few years. The police had never connected them because they happened so far apart. The carnival, called Madame Theta's Spectacular Wonder Show, had been touring small towns across 5 states since the 1960s. Each spring, they would set up for exactly 1 week in empty lots and fairgrounds. I created a spreadsheet of their visits to Cedar Grove, cross-referencing them with missing persons reports. The pattern was undeniable. Someone always disappeared during their stay, usually on the last night of the show. Digging deeper into our archives, I found more disturbing details. The missing people were always between 18 and 25 years old. They were usually described as loners or troubled. The carnival's owner, Madame Theta, appeared in photographs from the 1960s through the 1990s, but she looked exactly the same in every picture, never aging a day. When I tried researching other towns on their regular route, I discovered similar patterns of disappearances. Last week, I saw the posters going up around town. After a 15-year absence, Madame Theta's Spectacular Wonder Show was returning to Cedar Grove. The faded images showed the same attractions I'd seen in decades-old photographs. The Hall of Mirrors, the Tunnel of Love, the Fortune Teller's Tent. But what caught my eye was the new addition, the Chamber of Transformation, where dreams come true. I took my findings to Police Chief Martinez, but he dismissed my concerns. He said I was connecting unrelated incidents and that carnivals always attract runaways. When I mentioned Madame Theta's unchanging appearance, he laughed and suggested they were probably different women using the same stage name. I left his office feeling frustrated and more than a little afraid. The carnival arrived on schedule, setting up in the old fairgrounds at the edge of town. I watched from my car as their trucks rolled in before dawn, the workers moving with practiced efficiency. Something seemed off about their movements, too precise, too coordinated, like they were all following an invisible conductor. None of them spoke to each other, but they never collided or got in each other's way. I decided to visit the carnival on opening night, armed with my phone's camera and a small notebook. The attractions were exactly as shown in the old photographs, down to the smallest detail. Even the paint seemed aged in identical patterns. The Chamber of Transformation was housed in a massive black tent at the far end of the grounds. A sign promised a new life for the lost and lonely. Inside the carnival, I noticed the workers more clearly. Their movements were fluid but strange, almost mechanical. Their smiles never reached their eyes, which seemed to reflect light in an unusual way. When they thought no one was watching, their movements became jerky and unnatural. I could have sworn I saw one worker's arm bend in a way that shouldn't have been possible. Near midnight, I watched a young woman enter the Chamber of Transformation. She matched the profile of previous victims, young, alone, seemingly troubled. I waited by the exit, but she never came out. When I tried to follow, two carnival workers blocked my path. Their grip on my arms was ice cold, and their skin felt wrong, too smooth, too firm, like plastic over metal. That's when I saw her, Madame Teta herself, emerging from behind the tent. She looked exactly as she had in the photos from 1965, not a day older. But in the harsh light of the security lamps, something was wrong with her face. It seemed to shift and ripple, like a reflection in disturbed water. She smiled at me, and for a moment I saw what looked like seams along her cheeks, like the edges of a mask that didn't quite fit. I managed to break free and ran to my car. Behind the carnival, I saw a row of storage containers being loaded onto trucks. Containers large enough to hold a person. The workers moved them with inhuman strength, and I could have sworn I heard muffled sounds coming from inside. The next morning, I went straight to the police station with my evidence, but by then, the carnival had vanished. All that remained were tire tracks and a single poster, crumbling to dust in the morning sun. The young woman who entered the Chamber of Transformation was reported missing 3 days later. The police investigation found nothing, but I keep digging through newspaper archives from other towns, tracking the carnival's route. I've identified over 60 disappearances since 1965, all following the same pattern. Sometimes late at night, while sorting through old photographs, I catch glimpses of familiar faces among the carnival workers. Faces of people who went missing decades ago, unchanged by time. And recently, I've started receiving unmarked envelopes containing carnival tickets, each printed with the same message: "Your transformation awaits." I'm a history major at Boston University, and last summer I returned to my hometown of Sunderland Falls for my thesis research. The town was founded in 1806, and I plan to write about its role in early American textile manufacturing. My professor encouraged me to focus on local records that hadn't been digitized yet. The town clerk mentioned they'd recently discovered boxes of documents in the old courthouse basement, and I could be the first to go through them. The basement of the courthouse hadn't been properly organized since the 1950s. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old paper. The newly discovered boxes were piled in a corner, untouched for decades. I started with what looked like business records from the 1820s. Everything seemed normal at first: ledgers, correspondence, shipping manifests. Then I found an odd letter dated 1827, describing a special workforce at the mill that wasn't to be discussed in official records. The old textile mill still stands at the edge of town, though it's been abandoned since the 1940s. Growing up, we were always told to stay away because the structure was unsafe. The letter mentioned something called the lower workroom, but none of the mill's floor plans showed such a space. I cross-referenced population records from that period and noticed something strange. Every few months, the mill would report hiring 15 to 20 new workers, but the town's total population never increased. Digging deeper into the records, I found more disturbing patterns. The mill's production numbers were impossibly high for its reported workforce. There were cryptic references to night shifts that operated at enhanced efficiency. Medical records from the town doctor mentioned treating mill workers for strange symptoms: extreme pallor, sensitivity to light, and altered physical states. Most troubling were the personal letters describing workers who seemed to change physically over time, becoming gaunt and moving in strange ways. I discovered that the mill owner's estate had included a large root cellar, supposedly for storing textile materials. But the dimensions in the building plans didn't make sense. The underground space was far larger than the structure above it. The cellar's entrance was still there, hidden behind decades of overgrowth on the old estate grounds. The iron door was padlocked, but the rust had eaten away at the hinges. I returned at night with a flashlight and a camera. The steps led down into a maze of tunnels, the walls lined with rough-hewn stone. The air was stagnant, thick with an organic smell I couldn't identify. My flashlight beam revealed iron rings mounted to the walls at regular intervals, and dark stains on the stone floor that disappeared into deeper tunnels. The space felt wrong. The angles of the walls seemed to shift when viewed from different positions. In a large chamber at the end of one tunnel, I found machinery I didn't recognize. The design was like nothing I'd seen in historical records. Bronze mechanisms with curves that hurt my eyes to look at, gears arranged in impossible configurations. The machines seemed to pulse with a residual energy, though they'd been silent for over a century. Scattered among them were leather restraints and what looked like surgical tools, green with age. Hidden behind one of the machines was an old filing cabinet. Inside, I found medical records and detailed drawings of human anatomy, but with disturbing modifications. The diagrams showed bodies altered to work in inhuman ways, joints that bent backwards, muscles restructured for impossible strength, eyes modified for darkness. The handwritten notes described a process of workforce enhancement through mechanical and chemical augmentation. Further in, I discovered what could only be described as a laboratory. The equipment was a nightmarish fusion of medical and industrial technology. Leather straps on the tables were worn smooth with use. The walls were lined with glass containers holding unidentifiable specimens in clouded liquid. A logbook detailed procedures performed on workers to improve their productivity, with notes about success rates and acceptable losses. On my way out, I noticed something I'd missed before: symbols carved into the walls, unlike anything I'd seen in my historical research. They seemed to writhe in my flashlight beam, making my head hurt when I looked at them directly. Next to them were copper pipes that disappeared into the rock, still warm to the touch despite their age. The deeper I went into my research, the more I realized these tunnels might extend throughout the entire town. Last week, they broke ground for a new shopping center near the old mill. The construction crew uncovered a network of tunnels they weren't expecting. Before anyone could properly document them, the town council ordered the site filled with concrete. They claimed it was for safety reasons. But I've been monitoring town records, and there's been an unusual number of construction permits issued recently, all for projects requiring deep foundation work. I've changed my thesis topic and plan to stay in Boston after graduation, but I keep tracking real estate developments in Sunderland Falls. New businesses are moving in, promising to revitalize the town's economy. Their corporate records all trace back to a holding company called Heritage Industrial Solutions. Their logo incorporates one of the symbols I saw in the tunnels. Sometimes at night, I review my photos from the root cellar and notice new details. Shapes in the shadows that I missed before, and strange distortions in the images that seem to grow clearer each time I look at them.